Live on WFLA Now. This is Run for Fun with running enthusiast Lee Spann.
All right, welcome back to the Stream Center for this week's episode of Run for Fun. We wanted this show to help foster a love of running and a love of exercise and a love of movement rather than always focusing on just getting faster and exercising so hard. So I'm your host, Lee Spann. I'm a meteorologist at WFLA in Tampa, but I've also been running for about 14 years now. And running has taught me so much about myself. But one of the things that it continues to teach me, one of those life lessons, is to just keep showing up. Because you know what? In life, in running, in everything you do, it's not always rainbows and giggles every day. But if you don't keep showing up, you're never going to get to those rainbow days. So keep showing up. And of course, that's one of the mantras Coach Maria brings our way for all of her clients, all of her friends. Keep showing up, right, Maria?
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love some rainbows and giggles, though?
Those are my favorite days.
You can do rainbows and giggles, too. You just have to do some hard and some rainbows and giggles, right?
Some rainbows and giggles. I was thinking because Global Running Day was last Wednesday, and people, obviously I have a lot of friends who are in the running community, and everybody wrote things like that on Global Running Day. It's like, let me just tell you about what this sport means to me. And these are not people who do this for any sort of business or any sort of, money. This is just something that they love to do.
It's absolutely true. It's a metaphor for life, right? We got to keep going, keep showing up.
Keep showing up. And we are continuing to show up in our Juicy June Challenge, our Run for Fun Strava group. Now gaining members every week. We're up to 294. Getting ever closer to that 300.
I know. So exciting.
Download
And it is a juicy challenge. How's it going with you, Lee? Have you been recording all of your extra miles?
I have. I'm up to almost 60, I think 60 miles. So
good.
And the Juicy June Challenge is 200 miles of running, walking, biking, swimming, moving, as long as it's recorded in Strava. So I've been, like I said, a lot of those, not a lot, but I have added in biking, which is not something that I normally do. So,
I've been walking. I've been on my off days trying to walk 3 or 4 miles with my husband, which is actually kind of fun because we don't do it very often. And it's just a little bit more relaxing.
Yeah. Especially because what I'm doing obviously is I'm running, in the nighttime before work. And then, so then my biking is during the day and it's too hot to run. And so it's actually, I'm out there on my little cruiser. I'm not talking about, I'm not doing road race biking, but it is, I got music playing. It's been a lot of fun to get out there.
Some nice zone 2 training. I love it.
So again, just 200 miles of movement in June. And it is steamy out there. This is going to help get us acclimated, where our bodies are a little more used to this, so that come July and August and September and most of October, when the humidity is super high, we'll be a little bit more ready for it.
Love it.
And one of the ways where things we're getting used to is one of the ways we can get faster, better, and stronger is running up that hill. So Maria wanted to chat about hill workouts. So tell me why I need hill workouts in my life. Maria.
Well, see, I like to talk about hills this time of year, especially because if you're a Florida runner, and really if you have a fall marathon or anything, this is a good time to do base training. And really, hills are a great time. It's a great way to work on your base miles without trashing yourself, especially in the humidity. You don't have to hit a certain pace. You can go by effort, and you get a really big bang for your buck with the hill.
And so one of the quotes I found, Frank Shorter, who was a gold medal Olympic marathoner, one of his famous quotes apparently is, "Hills are speed work in disguise." So even if you're going the exact same, if you're going slow up a hill, guess what? It's like pushing yourself as if you were running faster.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the mistakes I see first.
Okay.
Typically, and it's just so funny because typically in a new fresh cycle, I will always start with 4 weeks of hills, and we build up strength before we do speed. And that's because you build strength in your quads and your hamstrings and your calves, and you're preparing your body for the speed work ahead. So in a base cycle, I like to start with 4 weeks. I've gotten pretty tentative recently because a lot of people get hurt, and it's mostly because I don't know if people just get so excited to see a hill. I don't in Florida because you have to go to a bridge. We don't run hills very often, and people just go full speed ahead uphill. And that is a big mistake. When you're first starting hills, you need to go by effort. The first couple, warm your body up, make sure you do a really good 10 to 15 minute easy jog warm up and do some dynamic stretches. So you're preparing your body to do what it's about to do. It's still a hard effort. And then kind of, you want to stay on the front of your feet. If you're doing hill repeats, shorten your stride. You kind of lean into the hill and you use your arms to push you up the hill. Big arms, short stride, and really focus on staying at a conservative effort. And as you get up the hill, you want to push harder and harder. And if you attack the hill from the beginning, you have a very high likelihood of getting injured. So be very careful, especially in those first few repeats. I usually start with 6, and I usually start 6 by 1 minute. And so that first 30 seconds of that minute, don't go gangbusters, kind of ease into it, especially like the first and second of those intervals.
So now this is talking about on the way hill workouts, right? So
yes, as a workout, you want to do anywhere from 60 to 90 seconds. 5K effort, which means 5K effort in the summer is much different than 5K effort in January. And that's kind of why I like to do them in the summer, because you're not so much in your head about trying to hit a certain pace. Really, in the summer, I don't want you to try to hit a certain pace unless you've raced a time trial in the summer and you have a good summer pace to go for. I would rather you go by effort. And really the goal of hills is to build strength in your quads and your hamstrings. And so even if you go 70 to 90% effort.
And so that's so you were saying a little bit, not 100%. I mean, and so the percentage
not 100% all out,
but you start
maybe
out
on your last. Yeah, maybe on your last 2 reps, you can push a little harder because your body's ready to do that at that point. But I see people they stand at the bottom of the hill and they look at the hill and then they're like, I'm going as fast as I can. And then they peter out. It's still a negative split you want to run when you're going up a hill. And you really want to push it that last 15 seconds of your interval. Push it that last 15 seconds and you should get stronger as you go. If you start your hills and you're getting slower and slower, you started too quickly.
So it is like speed work then. Like
it is absolutely like speed work.
If you have a set number of repeats to run fast or a certain pace, and each one gets slower, you didn't do that. You didn't do the speed work correctly. It should actually be getting faster. So the same thing.
And even in the summer, I tell people, if you have a goal pace, which I don't like to have a goal pace, but I know reasonably people are going to do it anyway. I would start even slower than your goal pace for the first couple. Warm your body up, make sure your body's strong enough to do it. It is very easy to pull a muscle if you're doing something silly with hills. So just be careful. Like, the goal is not to get hurt ever. You're always better off doing a little bit under your goal pace and staying uninjured than you are to blow through your first 3 and then bust a hamstring. We don't want to do that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So what gets injured? And it is that hamstring, because
usually your hamstring and calves, because you're up on the front of your toes a little bit more, and you can really mess up your calves.
So let's give people. I know that we had the graphic that said proper form. So should you try to lean more or
yes, you're leaning, but I like to say lean from your ankles, because a lot of people will bend over from the hip and then you don't want to hunch over. You still want to picture somebody pulling you from your chest, but you're at a lean from your ankles, and then you shorten your stride. And it's a very good way to get stronger. And especially in Florida, we don't have any hills. So we don't get this very often. So it's a good time to work on hills. Especially if you have a hillier race in the fall. You need those muscles to be stronger, and you need those muscles to be stronger if you're going to do track too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So should
Mm.
every person who, does it consistent running incorporate hills at some point, or should it only be, okay, I have a race that's going to be in a hillier course when I live in Florida, I need to start working on it, or is this something I can incorporate anytime?
No, you want to incorporate it in a base cycle usually. When you're not training for anything specific. It's very different when you have a hilly race. I really prefer you to find a hillier course, because running hills in a race is very different than doing hill repeats. They're two completely different things, and people get that very much confused. So if you have a hillier marathon, I would suggest going out to like Zephyr Hills or someplace that actually has hills, and or the Clearwater Bridge Loop, and actually running hills, because you need to learn the rhythm of running hills. It's really running hills in a race is, I mean, I'm kind of passionate about hills. I love hills, but it takes a rhythm and it's a skill, and you have to learn how to do that skill. If you're not doing it in Florida on a regular basis, you don't have that skill, and you need to do that if you're running, especially New York.
So when it says take 5 short steps at the top, can you explain a little bit about more about what
Yeah.
that means?
So when you're doing a hill repeat, the goal is to build strength. When you're running a hill in the race, the goal is to conserve energy and run efficiently. I can't tell you how many people have passed me on a hill and then said to me later in the race, Coach, you don't run hills well. And I'm like, that's funny, because my fastest marathons have been on extremely hilly courses. The reality of it is they were racing me up the hill, and then typically they have to walk at the top, and then they're jogging down the hill for recovery. That is absolutely not how you run a hill in a race ever.
And for
So
Floridians, well, we don't know. We don't know how to
I
run.
can't even tell you how many Floridians have done it. It is literally, it's so funny, because I'm like, I'll see you at the end. Because the reality is you have even effort going up the hill. And so your goal is to keep your heart rate as stable as you possibly can. Now your heart rate is going to climb when you're going up a hill. So you are going to have to, the effort isn't going to be exactly even, but you want to save energy. And then at the top, you take 5 fast steps, and then you race down the hill to make up the time. So your goal is not to get to the top as fast as you can and then recover on the downhill. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it takes practice and doing it a lot. And we just don't have that ability in Florida to be able to do that, especially since we have to drive to bridges, or we have to drive out, to San Antonio and find hills. But what an incredible addition to your training if you do, especially like a tempo run on a hillier course, because then you're running at marathon pace or a little bit faster in the rhythm of hills. And you can tell, like, going up the hill, you're going to slow down, and then you're going to make it up, and overall you'll stay in the same pace. But you're not going to, if your goal is to run 8:20 pace for the mile, you're not running 8:20 pace up the hill. You're more like running 8:40 pace up the hill and 8-minute pace down the hill. Do you see what I'm saying?
That gives you a good average, and it allows you to use gravity to help you, and not when you're not trying to fight it so hard when you're going up the hill. I mean, that's a lot of, it's a lot of gravity is pretty intense trying to pull you down. So
And hills are so tricky, because we have a lot of downhill races now, and people say it's an advantage, and a lot of people will say, I want to take the downhill races out so that people can't qualify for Boston with them. And I laugh every time, because it takes an incredible skill to run a downhill race well. You still easily can go out too fast in a downhill course and blow your race like you can any other. And in Florida, you can't practice it well. So it is more of an even split, sometimes a positive split course, but finding that balance between going out too fast or holding yourself back too much is very difficult. It's a very difficult skilled thing to do. And some people do it really well and some people do it poorly. And I think it's kind of cool that it's just kind of cool.
Yeah. And
I love a good downhill course.
right. And it uses different muscles, or I guess it
Yes.
uses the same muscles over and over rather than allowing your legs to have
Yes.
different. So everyone that talks about those downhill courses talk about that their quads are, pretty shot by
Yeah.
the end.
And that's the thing with a hilly course like New York, you need to practice the downhill too, because we're not used to running downhill in Florida. We don't have any of that. So, and the hills up north are much different than the hills in Florida. I mean, we do have little tiny rollers and people will be like, oh my gosh, we have it. I'm like, guys, that's not a real hill. It's just not a real hill.
So I do have a question about downhill.
Yeah.
Because one of my very first half marathons was a very hilly course in North Carolina. And someone told me that I should try to stay in the downhill sort of perpendicular to the ground as opposed to leaning, kind of
Yeah,
leaning
you don't want to
back.
lean back.
And so if you're not trying to lean forward where you'd fall, but you want to stay perpendicular, which means you are actually leaning. I mean, you are.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And you got to find that lean that's not like falling.
Right.
So it can be really tricky because you kind of have to brake, but you don't want to brake too much. It's very tricky to run downhill. You want to keep your center of gravity closer to the ground. So you're not, because actually the impact of going downhill is so hard on your knees. It's like 3 times the impact we get running regular. So you want to be really careful. You want to be thinking about being light on your feet and not slamming your feet into the ground going down. And, people get so carried away because they think it feels easy. It's really like the one kind of course that I'm like, no, don't go by feel. Because you're like, oh, this feels amazing. And you're going a minute and 30 seconds too quickly. One of my friends, shout out to Jordan, just ran the Tunnel Light Marathon, which is downhill and it's a 4% grade.
Whew.
And she crushed it. I mean, literally crushed it. And it was, I think her overall pace was like 8:09, but she still ran those first 4 miles in 8:20 pace. So like and it's not the same with everyone. That's a very slight downhill. So it is still a negative split course, but some of the Revel races that are very sharp, you really they're very sharp decline. They're like 7% to 9%. Some of them, that is definitely a perpendicular run where you're going to have to be very careful. And it's definitely a positive split race for sure.
So obviously running hill workouts will help overall with it. But are there exercises? I know for when I ran Little Rock, you had us do a lot of wall sits to build those quads up.
It's funny. For years when I was training for Boston in Memphis, my old podiatrist used to tell us to do backward elliptical.
Okay.
To like get down in the squat position and do backward elliptical to kind of build that eccentric strength in your quads. And I actually do feel like that worked, especially for a course like Boston that's downhill for the first 8 miles and then it's a lot of uphill. So you can do that. You can always add that in. Wall sits are great. Weighted wall sits are really good for building that.
You put on your knee. On your legs.
Yeah, you put it right on your legs and you just keep your back as flat as you can to the wall, and lower back needs to be on the wall too, guys. And you can't be leaning on your legs. I see that a lot, but and just lunges, things that are going to build your quad and hamstring strength to beat the impact. The people that do the best on the downhill courses are the ones that have very strong leg muscles at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And pacing.
Well, and uphill. I mean, right. I mean, typically a course would go up and down. And so, again, obviously there are the ones that go generally downhill, but are you using the same muscles to go uphill and downhill? Should you be working out different muscles?
You're using more hamstrings on the way up and more quads on the way down. Okay. So it's really, you have to be strong in both. And really that's where strength training comes in, because you don't lose your form if you have stronger legs. So, I mean, we all lose our form at some point in a marathon. Even the best runners will start to break down at some point, but that breakdown is further and further away the more strength you have in your legs. So that's kind of why we do hill repeats, because that's building leg strength.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still getting the cardiovascular benefit of taxing our body and adapting to it.
And so let's go a little bit into, you've mentioned it a couple of times, what to do as far as hills in Florida. If you're lucky enough to live in eastern Pasco County, that's where she was saying that's where Zephyr Hills is. That's where San Antonio is. People, especially bikers, will go out there. This is me over the North Boulevard Bridge, right over the Hillsborough River, and there's Blake High School. For me, that's if it's just at it high enough that I can usually do a minute up. So anytime you give me 60 seconds up, I can start at the bottom, go to the top, recover on the way down, go back and forth. So is there, besides bridges, if people, is there, what do you suggest?
I've seen people use parking garages too. A lot of people use that parking garage over in West Shore. And that's a great way to do it too. Because the thing I like about parking garages is it's typically a more gradual incline. When you're doing hills, it's not the steeper, the better. It's actually better to have a little bit more of a gradual incline, because you can be a little bit more gradual without trashing yourself. Really, you want to work up to like 90 seconds. So you start with like 60 seconds and then work up to, ideally you'd want to get to the point where you could do 12 at 90 seconds on and then walk down the hill. That's the other thing. When you're doing hill repeats, you don't have to jog downhill. You can walk downhill, and especially in the summer. Walking in the summer, guys, is not a bad thing. We did it this morning with our intervals. We did intervals around the park, and we did 300s, and we walked 100. Like, you can walk. It's okay.
It's hot.
It's brutal this time of year.
Yes.
Yes. And so if you're doing hill repeats, that's a great way to start with 60 seconds. Once you get to 10 to 12 of those, then you start back at 6 and go to 90 seconds. You can do that all summer and do no other workout, and you're going to be in great shape for fall. I mean, the thing about hills that I think when people add hills in, they're like, well, I got to do hills and I got to do track. In the summer in Florida, that's a recipe for disaster. One of those workouts is very taxing on your body in the summer. So maybe in the fall, and when the weather's a little bit better, you can handle 2 of those workouts. But if you're in the summer and it's 72 to 75 dew point, I would suggest sticking to one or the other. Or you could do 1 week hills, 1 week track, 1 week hills, 1 week track.
And it's especially if there's if you already have a fall race that is going to be hillier, maybe instead of doing both, you can add in the hills.
Yeah. Or if you have a fall race, I always think hill repeats are good to do in the beginning of a base cycle for 4 to 6 weeks. And then toward the end, when you're getting closer to your marathon, you can pick some of your medium distance long runs and go out and run a hillier bridge loop of like 10 to 14 miles if you're training for a marathon. You don't need to go do a 20 miler out there in the heat. You don't want to leave your marathon. Yeah. A lot of people, get caught up in this harder, faster, stronger. In the heat, it's actually, I think last summer, and I think I said this on the podcast before, last summer, even as careful as I am, I think a lot of my runners went into fall marathons a little bit overtrained, because probably they weren't eating enough and the weather was particularly bad last year. It was one of the hottest summers on record, and we needed more recovery. So you just really have to ride that line of, especially if you have a fall race like Chicago that's in October, you're not going to have a cold long run.
Nope.
So you got to be really careful about riding that overtraining line, because you're better going every day. You're better off going in 20% undertrained than 2% overtrained, because you'll just run faster. So,
and I do think that you mentioned it earlier for Floridians staring at, a bridge or staring at a big hill, we think, I just got to get to the top of that thing.
Yeah.
And because we're just so unaccustomed to it. So I still feel that same way when I get to a race like Cincinnati, which was very hilly. I'd see that hill and I was like, it was just that, let me just get over it rather than continuing to think about, what my pace could be as you said, the average. So those are very good things to think about.
If you're biking, it's the same thing. Like I actually learned how to run hills from a bike coach that I had. Shout out Roy Foley. He did put rocks in my water bottle on my bike, which was a little crazy, but
You'll have to explain that.
I will tell you, I have never felt so strong in San Antonio. And it was because he'd get us at the bottom of the hill and he'd say, he'd weight down our bike and then he'd say, your strongest part of this should be the top of the hill. And then you gain momentum over, and then you go down the hill and you're flying. And it dawned on me, I'm like, well, if you do that on a bike, probably should do that on a run too. And really, I mean, it's kind of, I don't even know the word, magical when you learn how to run hills. It just feels like, you just feel like a superstar. You're like, oh my gosh, I can. And people are afraid of hilly races. And I actually love a hilly marathon because I'm using those different muscles.
Mhm.
I'm like, now a hot hilly marathon, like your LA marathon was not so fun. But if you have a cold hilly marathon, it can be really fun.
Well, I mean, that is true. I mean, over 26.2 miles or 13.1, that's a lot of using the exact same muscle. So even again, you're giving some muscles a break by being able to use more on uphills and less on the downhills. So you're giving your legs a break, even though it feels like that would be the harder thing to do. But you have to be trained to do it correctly. I mean, I think that's
absolutely. Well, think about Chicago. Chicago's such a flat course, but man, you got to motor that whole time. You got to stay on pace and motor. There's no break. And it is fun to run downhill. Like it just, if you make it fun. I'm always smiling. I don't know if you've ever watched Michael Wilsey run down a hill, but he just loves hills. He's so funny in a race. He'll be like, yeah.
It's like a roller coaster.
Yeah, it is.
Anytime that there's ever an out and back where we do have it in Gasparilla where it's a tight turn, like you're going one way, and then in a street you have to go and you have to turn the 180 degrees back the other way. I always do that, like whee, because it's hard. It's hard to make that turn. So whatever makes you feel good. And for me, it's putting my hands up like I'm on a roller coaster.
Well, and pro tip, you use the five steps on a corner too.
Oh, that is good.
So when you get to the top of a hill, you take 5 quick steps to get back on pace and go back down. And then when you come out of a corner on a race course, hopefully you're running the tangents. You come out of a corner because you're going to slow on a corner, take 5 fast steps and you get back on pace.
All right.
I literally just told one of my clients the other day, she had a course in Boston that was a half marathon and it had a lot of turns. And I said, make sure you do 5 fast steps. And I said, how was your race? She goes, that was so fun to do the 5 fast steps.
Yeah. Well, again, it breaks up.
It gave her something to think about.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, if you're just running a flat course for a long period of anything that like I can look forward to changing up just a little bit, then that breaks up the whole, the monotony, if you will.
Absolutely. And it also keeps you in the moment.
Yeah.
Which anytime you're in the moment on a race course, that's going to be a better race for you instead of thinking about how many miles you have to run ahead.
And before we move on to anything else, how much if someone's just thinking, okay, I'll go run some hills, how would they incorporate it? First of all, that's the running up the hill should not be the first thing you do for your run. Like you should warm up.
You definitely have to warm up like you would a track workout. I treat hill workouts just like I do a track workout. So you'd want to do a nice, easy, and the older you get, the more warm up you need. So typically for me, it's, 15 to 20 minutes, easy jog. And then, if you're prone to injury, I would, make sure that you have nice warmed up calves, like maybe foam roll or, do some lunges or some things that are going to really get those calf muscles warm. Cause we don't want to pull a calf muscle. That's not fun. And then make sure when you're going up the hill, think light on your feet. We're not trying to jam our feet into the ground ever.
Yeah. And so should you stay on your toes, or you still should
you're more on the front of your foot. Yes. You're not going to run
on mid
which,
strike.
I hate to say be on your toes, because then people are like, oh, I need to be a toe runner. And you do not want to be a toe runner. But you are. And honestly, it's really hard to run within proper form uphill. It's very hard. I mean, you can't run on your heels.
Right.
So, although I'm sure somebody would try to if I said they can't. So, it's not likely that you can run in proper form uphill, except if you're hunched over. So don't hunch over. If you're hunching over, like this, you're not able to breathe correctly. You're not getting as much air in your lungs, and you need that air to get up the hill.
All right. And
so if it's the first time you've ever done it, be cautious. Don't go in like trying to be a superhero the first 30 seconds, or it'll be a short workout.
Yes. And in the coach's drill today, it's so you sort of alluded to it earlier. So we'll kind of move forward into don't waste your energy.
Yes. Guys, Floridians, I'm talking to you mostly. Stop wasting your energy on hills. I know that you like to race uphill, but you're leaving your race on that hill when you do that. You are absolutely wasting much needed energy that you will need for the end of the race. And that's not how you do it. So even though you feel like I would say a naughty word that I'm not supposed to say, you feel really strong when you go by somebody, it feels really awful when they pass you on the downhill. So don't do that. Make it up on the downhill, get back on pace, and run smart hills.
You're gonna thank yourself at mile 26 that you saved that
Absolutely.
energy, and I'm gonna thank you for censoring yourself. I knew exactly the word you were.
Yeah. It's so hard for me to censor on the show, but I'm doing it.
You did a very nice job. You're like, I'll even have a synonym for that word. It's the only word I want to use.
You're really strong. You're a really strong person.
You're good. The opposite of good. Bad.
It's an awesome thing when you learn how to run hills, and don't be afraid. Like, I have so many people that are so afraid of hilly courses. And if you're afraid of a hilly course because you don't think you can PR, that's not true either. If you're afraid of a hilly course because it's different and new to you, then just go try it. And if you run it correctly, you might end up loving it.
Or it can be one of those where you say, this was my hilly PR. This was my,
I love that.
And that way it does, you don't put as much stress on yourself, because those hills it's going to be tough.
Yeah. And watch yourself get way stronger when you start running those bridges on a 10-mile run. I mean, if you do that bridge loop, even if you did it once a month, even if you didn't have a hilly course, you're going to get stronger. There's no way, because you have to learn how to do that rhythm. So happy running on hills.
We're going to running up that hill, and we're going to get stronger, because it's really not about always, as we said, pushing yourself so much. It's about getting stronger. It's you building those leg muscles. And I believe our doctor told us that's one of the most important things for long life, is having those strong leg muscles. So it's all about
what else? You burn more calories too.
Win-win.
Win-win. Burn all the calories. Eat all the carbs.
See, we're just here to bring you the good news. All right, we'll see y'all. We'll see y'all next time on Run for Fun.
All right, bye-bye.